If your wife left the house at 10 p.m., would you be worried? I'm not, because I just need to turn on the local news to see her. My wife Carol Martin Coe, she hosts the nightly news on a top TV station in Birmingham. She's both smart and beautiful, and many believe her next job could be in a major market like Atlanta or Chicago. There's even talk of a New York offer, which is the ultimate goal for news anchors. I'm Tom Bailey, and Carol kept her maiden name for broadcasting, as many female announcers do this to separate their personal and professional lives. I'm proud and lucky to be Carol's husband. We met at the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa. She majored in broadcasting and I studied marketing. We met at a freshman year fraternity party and I was instantly smitten. She was tall, blonde, and she was absolutely stunning. I was outgoing but not at all the athletic or model type. Despite this, we hit it off and became a couple. We had our ups and downs, even breaking up for 2 weeks. I missed her so much I ran to her, only to find her running towards me. It was a movie-like moment, and we promised never to part again. We were madly in love. By the time we reached our final year, we were already living together off campus. However, we decided to wait until after graduation to tie the knot. Carol wanted a big wedding, and her family could afford it. We got married in the Canterbury Chapel just a week after graduation. Carol secured a weekend with her anchor job in Huntsville, which wasn't particularly prestigious, but was a good starting point. I, on the other hand, got a low-level job at a local ad agency, which was a great learning experience. She got a job at a local ad agency to gain experience. Her career took off quickly. She was offered a reporter position at the largest station in Mobile within a year. We moved to the Gulf Coast, where I found a job at a big ad firm. Carol did really well, becoming a weekend newscaster and eventually the nightly news co-host. Her pregnancy announcement was a huge hit, and our daughter Susan's birth was a local event. The station made a documentary series about Carol's experience as a new mom going back to work, which won a regional Emmy. Her success led to a co-host offer from Birmingham's top station WSYY. We left our beloved Mobile for Birmingham, knowing it could lead to even bigger opportunities. Birmingham has won. Birmingham has a population of 2 million and is a major media market, which was a big step up for Carol's career. I was a bit cautious about moving to Birmingham after being so comfortable in Mobile, but it turned out I had no reason to worry thanks to recommendations from my friends in Mobile and help from the Birmingham station. I found a great job at the city's second largest advertising agency. The station's management was fantastic and connected us with a knowledgeable real estate agent who found us a wonderful house in Hoover and a great daycare for baby Susan. The move was smoother than I expected, and we settled into our new life quickly. My daily routine is quite different because I'm married to a television journalist, which is pretty unique. I wake up, make breakfast, and go to work, leaving Carol and Susan to sleep. Carol gets up with Susan and spends the morning with her. After lunch, she takes Susan to Mrs. Olop's, who looks after Susan and a few other children. A few other kids are introducing them to concepts they'll encounter in kindergarten. I pick Susan up after work, cook dinner, and bathe her before reading to her and putting her to bed. Then I relax until Carol comes home, often waking me up on the couch. Carol's schedule is demanding. She arrives at the station at 3 p.m. to prepare for the evening news, which goes on air at 6 p.m. and again at 10 p.m. Lately, the news director Don Sanchez has been holding post-mortem meetings after the late newscast, which makes her stay even longer. The competition for ratings is intense, and stations are always looking to grow their audience share. As an advertising professional, I understand the focus on ratings, but as a husband, I miss time alone with Carol. We both work long hours and often feel more like neighbors than spouses. Even though we try to spend weekends together, it's tough, especially with Carol's increasing public appearances. Our schedules rarely align, making it difficult to discuss our situation, and Carol seems reluctant to talk about it because there are no easy answers. When we married, we discussed these challenges and I agreed to everything. Moreover, many of our friends face similar issues with demanding jobs. I try to be supportive because I knew what I was getting into. Carol's income significantly eases our life, even though money isn't everything. Eventually, I couldn't keep my frustration to myself. One day at lunch, I confided in Lou Faraday, the media director at our agency. Lou is married with a daughter who is slightly older than Susan. He became my best friend at work when he talked about how happy he was with his family. I blurted out, "Damn, I wish I had what you have. Looks like trouble in paradise, buddy." "What's going on?" Lou said. I poured my heart out, surprising myself with how bad I felt. "I'm married to one of the best women on TV," I grumbled. "I see her as often as her fans do." Lou shook his head sympathetically. "That sucks. Tom, can't you take a vacation or a long weekend? Your folks would love to keep Susan." I said, "But Carol says Don Sanchez is pushing them to keep ratings up. He's afraid their absence will cause a drop they can't recover from." "Look," replied Lou. "I know Don Sanchez. He's ambitious, but also decent. Maybe you should talk to him and see if he can help you and Carol get some time together." "I don't know," I sighed. "Carol would fire me if she found out I talked to her boss. She doesn't need to know." Lou said Don's coming to the agency tomorrow for a presentation. You can catch him afterwards. "I don't want to mix personal issues with work." I said, "Don't be silly. It's just a preliminary meeting. This is a great chance to talk to him that evening." Carol arrived even later than usual. She didn't wake me from the couch where I had dozed off. I woke up in the middle of the night and dragged myself to bed next to her. I thought, now we won't even get to kiss her goodnight. I was determined to change our pattern. I kept an eye on the conference room the next day as the meeting ended. I waved at Don, who was in a good mood. "Hey Tom," he said, "how's my favorite news anchor's husband?" "Hey Don," I replied, "do you have a couple of minutes?" "Sure, what's on your mind?" he asked, cheerfully. "I need you to give Carol a break. You're working her too much." I said, "It's tough, isn't it?" He looked concerned. "Did she complain?" "No, she likes it. I'm the one who suffers. I don't see her anymore." He relaxed and joked, "You knew she had a demanding job when you married her, didn't you?" I agreed, but all these appearances and post-show meetings cut into our time together. Okay, he said. "We've probably overdone it. I'll see if we can lighten her schedule," he said. "Don't worry about the post. We haven't had a postmortem since the last ratings came out. Have you seen how much we're outranking the competition? Management is thrilled. I've got to get to my next meeting. Keep pleasing your bride with that." He patted my back and left, back at my desk. I checked the ratings and saw the last set was published a month ago. If Don hadn't held a postmortem in a month, what was Carol doing when she came home so late? I couldn't shake the thought. I wondered if she was having an affair, but quickly dismissed it. Carol loved me and wouldn't jeopardize our marriage. There were plenty of reasons she could be late, like catching up on fan mail or unwinding, but those reasons didn't make me feel any better at that moment. Lou popped his head in. "Hey, I saw you talking to Don. Did he give you any relief?" "I'm not sure, Lou. I guess I won't know until I talk to Carol." He looked a bit puzzled, but when I didn't say more, he turned to leave. "Okay, buddy. Let me know if there's anything I can do the rest of the day." I was like a zombie. I went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. I kept thinking about what Don had said and what Carol had told me about her late hours. I considered confronting her, but I was worried I'd look foolish if the explanation was innocent. Accusing her of an affair wouldn't help our relationship, and avoiding the issue felt weak. By the time I left work to pick up Susan, I hadn't solved anything. Thankfully, my 4-year-old was happy to have me home. My old colleague's demands distracted me for the evening. She was unusually clingy, sensing my mood and didn't want me to stop reading to her when she finally fell asleep. I found tears welling up, thinking how sad it would be if her parents divorced. I was emotionally drained. I watched TV but couldn't focus until the news came on. Watching Carol, I remembered how much I loved her and convinced myself she wouldn't cheat. It was past midnight when Carol arrived. "Oh, I didn't realize you were coming." She said she was still up and I hugged her. "I just wanted to see you. You're awfully late tonight." She kissed me quickly and took off her shoes. "Yeah, sorry." Don held us up again with one of his autopsies. She said she was going to bed as she walked upstairs. I realized she'd lied. Don said he hadn't held a session in a month. I didn't want to believe she was cheating, but I also didn't want to ignore the truth. The next day I asked Lou to have lunch with me. He sensed my. We drove to a restaurant far from the office in silence. When we ordered, I hesitated, then Lou said, "It's Carol, isn't it?" His words opened the floodgates, and I poured out my fears and insecurities. Lou listened silently. "I thought you and Carol had the happiest marriage." Elle said, "Me too." I replied sadly, "So what are you going to do?" He asked, and his question clarified my thoughts. "I need to go to the station and see for myself if I'm wrong," I said. "Everything's innocent. I'll sneak out undetected. Carol will never know." "If you're right," Lou asked quietly. "I don't know, but at least I'll know the truth. It's better than this." "What about Susan?" he asked. "I've already thought of that. I told Lou when we get back, I'll call Mrs. Alsop and ask if I think she can keep Susan late tonight. She's offered before, so it should be fine." We finished lunch and went back to the office, but we were still pretty distressed. I felt better having a plan. Even people facing execution feel some relief when the day finally arrives. Mrs. Alsop agreed, but asked me to come back by 11:12 a.m. "I have work in the morning," she said. It wasn't much time, but it was the best I could get, so I promised. After work, I informed Susan of the change. She cried at first, but brightened when Mrs. Alsop mentioned a pizza party. I paid for the extra time in pizza, then left before Susan could get upset again. I went home, made dinner, but couldn't eat. Cleaning up, I tried to distract myself, but doubts grew. The news wouldn't end until 10:30 p.m. What if Carol came straight home? What would I say? These fears paralyzed me until I remembered my resolve at lunch. I had to do something by 10 p.m. I decided to go to the station. There wouldn't be many people there, an engineer, 2 cameramen, and a sound technician. Hopefully I could go unnoticed when I arrived. I realized my mistake. Joe the night watchman was there. He knew me, so getting in wasn't an issue. But I had to sign in. I had thought about going stealth, but it wasn't going to work. "Good evening, Mr. Bailey," Joe said, "here to see the news." I replied, signing the log. Joe, he looked at me with sympathy. "There won't be a problem, will there?" he said. "No, of course not," I replied, heading to the studio. What did he mean? Did he know something? I looked through the blackout curtains. The news had just ended, and Carol was heading towards the green room instead of her dressing room. The green room was usually reserved for guests who never appear on the 10. I saw Carol open the door and a lamp inside revealed a male figure. The door closed and I was left outside, heart pounding. I could burst in, but if it was innocent, Carol would never forgive me. If I stayed outside, I'd never know. I remembered a small observation window Carol had shown me. I headed there and checked the time. It was already 10. It was 45 minutes to my next appointment, so I needed to leave soon to pick up Susan. I peered through the window and saw Carol in a passionate embrace with a man. I recorded a video with my phone, and the light made her black lingerie stand out against her skin. I wanted to end it, but seeing the time, I had to pick up Susan. I ran to the lobby. I nodded to Joe and headed out the door. "I'm sorry, Mr. Bailey," Joe said. Damn, I thought. Does everyone but me know what's going on? She looked at me oddly and asked, "Are you all right, Mr. Bailey?" I'd only just realized I had tears streaming down my cheeks. "Oh, it's nothing, I just got something in my eye," I said. I thanked her again, carried Susan to the car, and drove home. Susan stayed asleep as I carried her upstairs and put her to bed. She looked so sweet and innocent, and I longed for the innocence I had lost tonight. I got a beer from the fridge and sat in the dark, waiting. Everything was quiet, and a memory of my grandmother's passing flashed through my mind. The silence was punctuated by my sadness when Carol got home around 1. It's 12 a.m. It's 10 a.m. She switched on the kitchen light and saw me sitting there. "Tom, what are you doing?" she asked, surprised. "I've been waiting for you," I replied, keeping my voice even. "The security guard said you came by the studio. Is everything okay with Susan?" "Mrs. Allo kept her for me." "She's asleep upstairs," I answered. "If you came to the studio, why didn't you just come in?" "Didn't you stop by my office?" she asked, her voice tinged with confusion. I steadied myself. This was it. "I saw you tonight. I saw you go into the green room with Ted Stevenson." "Oh, we just had a meeting after the news," she replied nonchalantly. "Carol," I looked through the observation window. "I saw what your meeting was. I even saw your new lingerie." I watched as she looked embarrassed. "Oh, Tom, I'm so sorry." "Are you sorry you did it or just sorry you got caught?" She dropped to her knees and took my hands. "No, honey, I'm not leaving you. This is just a fling. Maybe it'll be over soon and things will go back to normal," she said, her words shocking me. "You're not going to stop. You're going to keep cheating on me." I asked in disbelief. "It doesn't mean anything. Just let me have my fun, and I'll come back to you." She said it in a dismissive tone. "I can't believe this." She was expecting me to agree to being betrayed. I shouted, unable to contain my anger. She stood up and looked at me coldly. "Tom, you really don't have a say," she said bluntly. "I'm your husband. If you don't stop, I'll file for divorce," I threatened, hoping to make her realize the gravity of the situation. She looked at me with a cold, calculating expression. "I don't think that's in your best interest, Tom. You'll lose custody of Susan and most of our assets. The court won't care about the affair. They'll prioritize Susan's welfare, and I'll get custody. You'll only see her on weekends and some holidays." "Infidelity," I protested, feeling the situation slip further out of my control. "This is a no-fault state, Tom. The court won't care. Ask a lawyer if you don't believe me," she said with a finality that chilled me. "I don't want this to happen, Tom. I want our family to stay together. This fling shouldn't concern us. Just think about it." Before going to bed, I sat there feeling angry, sad, and confused. It was hard to believe that Carol would cheat on me, and that she would suggest we continue the affair was beyond me. Finally, I went to bed and fell asleep almost immediately, even though I was exhausted. I woke up at 6. The next morning, I showered, shaved, and got dressed. My mind was racing with wild thoughts: run away, shake Carol awake, kidnap Susan, or even never get out of bed again. But looking at Susan asleep, I knew I had to stay strong. Doing something stupid would only cause me to lose her. I had to put her first, so I did my morning chores and headed to the office, working on autopilot. Tom Lou said, "Are you okay?" when I didn't answer. He came in and closed the door. "What's wrong?" he asked. I told him everything about last night. Lou listened, taken aback by Carol's attitude. "Damn it," he said, "she expects you to put up with her cheating." He looked me in the eye and said, "Carol has changed. You can't rely on her anymore. You need to look out for yourself. The first thing you should do is consult an attorney," he continued. "You need to find out your rights." "Hello," I replied. "I don't know any lawyers in Birmingham. That's where I can help." "My college roommate is a lawyer here," he said with a smile. "I'll call him a moment later." He returned with a piece of paper. "You have an appointment at 1:00 p.m. today. Here's his name and address." "Thanks, Lou. At least it gives me something to do." I said gratefully, no problem. After you meet him, come back and tell me what he said. He said the meeting with the lawyer was disheartening. He listened to my story and then explained that in a no-fault state, the court doesn't care who did what. It only decides on the division of property and child welfare. What does that mean for me? I asked. In short, Carol will get custody unless. He said that Susan is unfit, but you'll get visitation rights. You'll also live with her, and you'll pay child support, even though Carol makes more money. He mentioned that the house is joint property, but the court prefers children to stay in the house. Carol will likely keep it until Susan turns 18, and then you can sell it and divide the equity. But what if she moves to another market? I objected, and then you can sell the house until. Then it stays put, he clarified. I shook my head, feeling defeated. Damn it, she knew exactly what she was talking about. I'm screwed. I muttered. I'm sorry, he said as we shook hands. It's not always fair, but that's the law. Driving back, I felt like I was being punished for a sin I didn't commit. Lou saw my face and knew the outcome. Damn it, Lou. I said it's just not fair. She put me in this situation, and there's nothing I can do. I have to put up with it to keep my daughter. And my home. I paced around the office. I now understand why some men lose it. Don't even joke about that, Tom Lou said quickly. I know you're angry, but if anything happens to her, I don't want to testify that you made threats. Okay, I get it. I agreed. I wouldn't do anything like that. It just feels like she's an albatross around my neck. I glanced out the window and groaned. A new billboard showed Carol and Ted Stevenson with the caption Birmingham's Choice for the 6th. I said to Lou, pointing at the sign, I can't escape her even here. Lou looked at the sign and then had an idea. How desperate are you to get out of this mess? He asked. Not desperate enough for violence, I said firmly. Not that, but I have an idea, he said. We talked for an hour, with me repeatedly saying it was crazy and wouldn't work. Lou kept asking how much worse off I'd be. Eventually, I realized I was stuck and needed to try something. Okay, Lou, I'm in. I finally said, leaving the office feeling determined but filled with doubt. Could I risk losing my daughter for this plan? Maybe it was better to live as a betrayed man. As I picked up Susan and made dinner, I kept thinking. I turned off the TV, unable to watch Carol and Ted on the news, surprisingly. Carol came home early. She put Susan to bed and I heard them laughing and reading stories. It felt like old times when Carol came downstairs. I thanked her. She misses you, especially at bedtime, she said. I missed her too. I wondered if she was reconsidering her choices, but my hopes were quickly dashed. I'm going on vacation next week, she said. Don Sanchez suggested it because our ratings are so high. I'll check with my boss tomorrow to see if I can join you, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. Tom, Ted, and I are going away alone. We're tired of sneaking around and want to enjoy each other without worrying. I was stunned. Mrs. Alsop is going to look after Susan all week. You just need to drop her off and pick her up. Here's where I'll be if you need to contact me. She handed me a paper. We'll be back on Sunday and things will go back to normal. She kissed me on the head like a child and said thanks for taking care of everything, honey. I went to bed, feeling pretty humiliated. I was shaking with anger and knew I had to regain my dignity. Elle's crazy plan seemed like the best option. I left work early on Friday to see Carol before she left with Ted Stevenson. I arranged for Mrs. Alsop to keep Susan overnight. I wanted to make sure she wouldn't see any arguments, so I checked Carol's closet and saw her suitcases. I knew she'd come home to pack when her car pulled in. I waited in the living room. What are you doing here? She asked. Is Susan okay? She's fine. I'm here because I want to convince you not to go with Ted. Go away with Ted this week. I told her, putting my hands on my hips. I've already told you, I'm having an affair with Ted. When we get back, it'll be over and everything will go back to normal. You just have to be patient. But what about our wedding vows? I asked. I want to know what about leaving everyone else behind. Those vows were made for a different time. Carol said, sounding irritated, that's old news. I don't want you to dishonor our marriage. I'll do what I want, I replied. This has nothing to do with you and me. But what about your fans? She asked. They won't approve. I don't care, I said. What they think in a year I'll leave this town for a real city. What people here think means nothing to me now. Stop pestering me. I have to pack or I'll be late. If you can't stand seeing me with Ted, leave. She said it coldly. I stood up, slumping my shoulders. I'm sorry, Carol. I'm sorry for everything. I left and drove. I went to the local tavern to unwind while I was waiting for my second beer. Lou walked in. Hey buddy, he said. How's it going? I replied, feeling defeated. Not until you try what I did, he said, with a determined look. At my computer, I quickly found the footage of when Carol rejected my proposal and discussed her plans with Ted. I couldn't believe it. Lou was really excited when he saw her turn her fans away and talk about leaving town. He saved the recordings to a flash drive. He said, holding up the drive, I've got a backup copy of the footage. Let's get in the car and drive back to the tavern for Lou's car. I followed him home for dinner. Edie made a big dinner. If you don't show up, she'll be pissed, he said. I wasn't sure if it was friendship or pity, but I appreciated it either way. I don't remember much of the dinner, just picking at my food while Lou and Eddie exchanged concerned glances. Afterwards, they led me to the den and Lou opened a bottle of wine. We drank until Eddie couldn't hold back any longer. I'm so angry and disappointed in Carol. I don't know what to say. She always seems so sweet and loving, but she's turned into a selfish, promiscuous woman. Edie exclaimed. Success has changed her. She thinks she can do anything. She turned sharply to Lou. Do whatever you can to help Tom. I don't like taking sides in divorces, but this is different. Carol is out. She said that we need to help Tom keep his daughter. She then gave Lou a piercing stare and said, if you get hit on by any of those models or TV personalities, you better say no or I'll come after you with a butcher knife. Lou and I laughed, but I wasn't sure if she was exaggerating to make a point. We talked and drank into the night. I remember Eddie covering me with a blanket and patting my arm until I collapsed on their couch. The next thing I knew, morning light was streaming through the window, and I had a horrible taste in my mouth. Lou lent me a toothbrush and razor, and I tried to make myself presentable. Ed had made a big breakfast, and I joined them at the table. My appetite was a little better, probably due to my survival instincts kicking in after breakfast. Breakfast was served, and I joined them at the table. My appetite was a little better, probably due to my survival instincts kicking in after breakfast. Lou took my hand and said, leave everything to me. I've got a lot to do this weekend. Just pick up Susan and get out of here. I'll keep you posted. Lou, I don't know, I replied. I said, what would I do without you? I gave him a hug, which felt a bit awkward, and went home. I still had one more task to do, which I wasn't looking forward to. I found Ted and Missy Stevenson's number in our address book. When I called, Missy answered. Hi, Missy. This is Tom Bailey, Carol's husband. Can I come over now to talk? Hi, Tom. Yes, come over. On over, she replied, sounding a bit hesitant, probably wondering why I wanted to see her. As I drove to her house, I thought about what to say. Telling a woman her husband is cheating is never easy, and it was more awkward since I didn't know Missy well. But she needed to know. Missy went to the University of Alabama with Carolyn. She was in the same sorority as Carol, but she was 2 years younger, so we didn't socialize much. I was surprised she married Ted, as she didn't seem his type. When I arrived, she greeted me and offered me a drink of water with ice. I said I was afraid my mouth would go dry when she brought it, so I took a sip and began. Missy, do you know where Ted is? I asked gently. She said he's at a TV convention all week. Why? I inquired, a note of concern creeping into her voice. Missy, I'm sorry to tell you this, but Ted isn't at a convention. He's with my wife having an affair at the coast. I'd slapped her. That can't be, she protested. I saw him off last night. He loves me. Carol was like a sister to me. She wouldn't hurt me. She said her voice was trembling. Finally, she broke down. Oh, Tamar, you sure? She asked, tears welling up in her eyes. I grimly showed her the video from the green room as she watched it. Missy's eyes were red and she was crying. I sat next to her and stroked her back. I said, I know, Missy, I know. I was trying to offer some comfort. Then she looked up and seemed angry. She said, that cow seduced him. She stopped when she saw my shocked face. She said, oh Tom, I'm sorry you lost your wife too. She seemed to be implying that I had lost my wife too. It made me think of my own pain and loss, and I started crying again. We hugged to comfort each other, and then we pulled away. She wiped her face and asked what I was going to do now. I told her about the difficult situation Carol had put me in, especially regarding Susan. Missy, who had no children, immediately understood Carol's influence over me and grasped my hand sympathetically. Oh Tom, I never thought she could be so cruel. If I succeed, she and Ted will regret cheating. I tried to smile to reassure her, but I probably failed. What about you? Can you rebuild your marriage after this? You've been together a long time and they're weak together. I can't stay with him. Maybe you should use my lawyer, unless you have someone else in mind. I suggested. She gave a weak smile. I don't know any lawyers, but if you use mine it could save you money since he already has my evidence. I handed her my lawyer's contact information and said, call him on Monday and let him know we're on the same page. She nodded and took the paper. Missy, I need a huge favor. What is it? She asked, looking nervous. Please don't tell anyone about this until you hear from me. It could cost me the chance to keep Susan. She looked at me solemnly and nodded. I won't say a word, Tom. I promised. Thank you, and I'm going to leave now. What are you going to do now? She asked. I'm going to pick up my daughter and take her out of town until this settles down. I'm going to take her out of town until this all blows over. She wished me luck, and I did the same. We're both going to need it. I thought I drove to Mrs. Alsop's house when I arrived. Susan met me at the door and jumped into my arms. Did you have a good time, honey? I asked. Oh yes, Daddy. I had a sleepover and we had pancakes for breakfast. I also played with dolls. I thanked Mrs. Alop and reminded her that Susan wouldn't be coming next week. She looked at me and asked if everything was okay. I told her it was, and she kissed Susan's cheek and said, take good care of her. She's like family to me. I thanked her and said, you're welcome, Mrs. Alop. It was a big deal. I carried Susan to the car and buckled her in when we got home. She asked where her mom was. She said she had to go on a trip, but that she and I were going on a trip too. Where are we going, Daddy? She asked, excitedly. I told her to Grandma and Grandpa's farm. She squealed and started dancing. Susan loved visiting my parents and seeing. She asked if we could see the farm animals, including the ducks and little pigs. I told her we could, and then I grabbed our bags and we headed to the car. On the way, we turned onto the gravel road and she woke up and pointed at the horses and cows. When we arrived, Mom and Dad greeted us. Susan rushed into Grandma's arms, eager to see the animals. Mom took her to the barn, giving me a concerned look. I took my bag, and Dad took Susan's. We went inside and Dad offered me a glass of fruit tea in the kitchen. It tasted a bit like my childhood. What's going on with you and Carol? Dad asked, looking worried. Let's take a walk, he said. I'll tell you everything. I'd been waiting for this conversation ever since I called and asked if we could stay for a week. They loved Carol and considered her the daughter they never had. I knew it would affect them deeply as we walked along the fence. I told my dad the whole story. He was mostly silent, but I saw the pain in his eyes. He gasped at some parts. By the end of the conversation, there were tears in his eyes. I can't believe Carol could do this. She's always been so good to us and such a good mother to Susan. How could she become so callous and selfish? He looked at me carefully. Tom, could this be some kind of misunderstanding or a joke? I understood. I still had trouble believing it myself. I pulled out my phone and showed him the video from the green room. Watch this, Dad, when he took the phone. I reached over and pressed the arrow to start the video playing. He muttered to himself in a half whisper, I can't make out almost anything. I saw Carol's nearly undressed body break free from Ted Stevenson's embrace and begin sliding down his torso. I took the phone from him, and he stood there helplessly, his shoulders slumped and his face tense. Then he grabbed me and he gave me a tight hug and said, "Oh son, I'm so sorry. It hurts me so much to see this. I can't imagine how you felt." We stood there for a few more minutes, then walked back to the house in silence. He kept his hand on my shoulder, and I turned to him and asked, "Dad, can I? I think I'll have to tell Mom I can't do it." He nodded solemnly and said, "I'll do it." Mom and Susan were in the kitchen having a snack when we got back. Mom looked worried when she saw Dad's face. He said, "Why don't you take Susan to the pond to see the ducklings?" Susan jumped up, tugging on my arm. Susan was keen to see the ducks, so I let her go to the pond with her dad. When we got back, her mom was crying. She gave me a big hug and said, "I love you, Tom. Dad and I will be here for you no matter what happens." I thanked her and she said, "Thanks, Mom." I looked at my dad and said, "Thanks, Dad. That means a lot." We stood together for a long time, and the silence was awkward for Susan. I turned to her and said, "Okay, Susan. Let's go unpack and get ready for dinner." She took my hand and led me to our room. I told myself I would never lose my daughter. The next day, we went to the old Baptist church that my parents had attended for years. I was glad to hear the familiar words and sing the old hymns that evening. Lou called to update me on his weekend's work. I realized how lucky I was to have him as a friend and how much I owed him for trying to thank him, but he brushed it off. He said, "You would have done it for me." He understood what I wanted to say, but then his tone changed. He said, "Okay, Tom, are you ready to put our plan into action? There's no turning back once we start." I paused to consider. There were risks. Even if we succeeded, things could still end badly. Carol had humiliated me and put me in an unbearable position, so I had to fight back. "Lou," I said, "let him do it." Lou must have sensed my resolve, because Eddie thinks you're doing the right thing. I laughed. "Yes, we're not living in the 1800s. Good. I'll call you tomorrow with more info." "Why not just email me the link?" "No, I want to keep this private. Just wait for my call." In her new bed, Lou called mid-morning Monday. When you get some privacy, go to YouTube and type WXY into the search bar. Watch it and tell me what you think. Mom and Dad took Susan out for a walk, so the timing was perfect. I went to YouTube and searched one video titled WXY Co. I noticed that Carol Martin, the host, was sharing her personal philosophy on love and marriage. The familiar theme music for the six, while the news was playing, the camera focused on Carol, and her voice faded as a voiceover began. It was a popular news show co-hosted by Carol Martin. The host of WXY, Carol Martin, was recently interviewed about her views on love and marriage. The voiceover announced that the screen switched to Carol, who said, "Marriage is an institution that has been around as long as human society, but today it is under siege like never before." I recognized those lines from a series WXY had aired about the rising divorce rate. Instead of continuing, the voiceover returned with, "What are your views on?" The sanctity of marriage. The scene then moved to Carol's den, where she spoke about how wedding vows were written for another time. She said that people no longer believe in that nonsense. The voiceover resumed, asking what about the public's opinion. Would Carol's viewers agree? Carol answered that she didn't care what her fans thought. They were just redneck dorks. In 6 months to a year, she'd leave this town for a real city. What people here thought meant nothing to her. The unseen voice asked if Carol planned to have an affair with Ted Stevenson. Carol's response was clear. She'd already told him. You know, I'm going to have my affair with Ted, and there's nothing you can do about it. The video then switched to footage I shot in the green room. Carol was nearly undressed with Ted, and the scene froze on an intimate moment. The voiceover then concluded, leaving Birmingham viewers with one question: where are Carol and Ted this week? The WXY News theme then played, showing an empty newsroom before fading out. I leaned back, feeling a mix of triumph and sadness. I called Lou, who answered. What do you think? My God, Lou, you're a genius. This will ruin her career. I said, amazed. Not bad, huh? I'm proud of it. He said cheerfully. I felt a twinge of guilt. Were we too rough on her? I asked. Did she say all these things to you? Lou countered, yes, but no. She turned into a selfish monster, and we need to show that to the world. He said firmly, you're a good guy, Tom. If you don't do this, you won't be the one suffering, it'll be Susan. Do you want Carol as her role model? You're right, Lou. There's no choice. I said, so what's next? Do we send out mass emails with the video link? He said, no need. It'll spread on its own. I'll hint to a few gossipers and it'll go viral. Just be patient. He assured me, okay, Lou, keep me informed. I said, okay. I feel a bit more at ease for the next few days. Susan and I enjoyed our time at the farm. Susan learned about farming and cooking with my mom. It was a great week, and she got to try things she wouldn't normally see in the city. Meanwhile, Lou called every day with updates. On Tuesday, he laughed as he told me he had heard about the video from a colleague. By Wednesday, it had been discussed at the meeting, and on Thursday, a media columnist mentioned it in the paper. Everyone was wondering where it was going to go next. Carol and Ted were really happy when he called me on Thursday afternoon. I spoke to our media officer, who handles WBX. Ted said that the whole station is in a panic. They're getting calls from other news outlets trying to interview Carol and Ted about the video. The WXY staff doesn't know what to do. Don Sanchez is also out of town, and no one can reach him on Friday. Ted directed me to a media blog article on Gawker. I read on the news site that the WXY anchors were causing a stir and that the YouTube video was going to lead to some changes at the station that morning. I called my lawyer to file for divorce and arranged for Carol to be served on Saturday at the country house in Gulf Shores, where she and Ted were staying. I thought it was worth the cost. I also called Missy to let her know and asked if she wanted Ted served at the same time. She said she'd do it herself when he got home. I wished her luck. Other local TV stations in Birmingham were jealous of WXY's success and saw an opportunity when they saw the video. Lou tipped off a producer at the second highest rated channel that I was filing for divorce, which they could report as a real news event. My attorney confirmed the filing and revealed the location where Carol would be served. The station decided to go all out, sending a video crew and lead reporter to Gulf Shores on Saturday. Lou called me Saturday morning with more news. Don Sanchez has been contacted, cut his vacation short, and is trying to return to Birmingham. The WXY staff is terrified. Lou advised me to watch the evening news on a competitor station on Saturday, which is usually a slow news day. The Carol and Ted story was the top headline. The host opened with a picture of Carol and Ted, showing a billboard from my office window. Lots of people in Birmingham have been wondering where Carol Martin and Ted Stevenson of WXY are. We found them in Gulf Shores. The footage then showed reporter Hilda O'Reilly walking down the beach towards Carol and Ted. They were sunbathing and didn't notice until Hilda started asking them questions loudly. She asked Carol Martin and Ted Stevenson what they could tell her about their relationship and the stories going around in Birmingham. Carol quickly covered her chest and Ted tried to cover his Speedo with a towel. Hilda then asked them about the video that was all over the internet. Carol asked, "What video?" "The one where you told Birmingham rednecks you came here to have an affair with Ted Stevenson." Hilda replied coldly. Carol sputtered and Ted tried to intervene, but a man in a suit suddenly appeared, asking, "Are you Carol Bailey Martin?" Reflexively, Carol answered, "Yes." Then he said, "Miss Martin," handing her an envelope. "You have been served. Your husband also instructed. I'm here to tell you that the locks on your house have been changed and you're no longer welcome there." The man walked away, leaving Carol stunned. She was angry as she screamed that Ted was a son of a cow. Ted, realizing the cameras were still rolling, grabbed her and led her towards the resort. The camera followed, focusing on her oil-slick backside as she stormed away. The local announcer reappeared on the screen. Carol Martin and Ted Stevenson, who have been missing all week, were sharing a room at a posh Gulf Shores resort. Carol's husband has sued her for divorce and kicked her out of the house. We tried to contact him, but he didn't respond. They couldn't reach me because Susan and I were at my parents' farm. Lou informed me that Carol hadn't believed I was confused about the locks being changed, so I went to the house with Ted. I couldn't get in, so I was pretty frustrated. The camera crew caught it on camera. Missy served him divorce papers at the door. They ended up spending the night in a motel. Lou got more details from our media manager, who heard from a contact at WXY. Don Sanchez returned. They went to Birmingham and tried to get in touch with Carol and Ted, who had turned off their phones. Don was really angry, especially after seeing the competing network's exclusive report. Ted finally called the office on Sunday afternoon, and Don told them to come to the studio. They went in through the service elevator to avoid the competing station's van. Don was really angry with them for what they'd done. And then they fired them in front of the staff. Carol SC screamed, "You can't do that. We have a contract." Don replied coldly, "Your contracts have a morals clause requiring you to behave according to societal norms. What we do in private is nobody's business." Carol snapped back. Don, a practicing Catholic, stood up. The priest spoke about the sanctity of marriage and the sin of infidelity. "At Mass this morning, he didn't mention you by name, but he referred to public figures setting a bad example." Carol recoiled, but Ted continued. "Nobody knows or cares about us," Don sarcastically replied. "Obviously, you didn't see the news last night." "Just look out the window," he said, pulling back the curtain to reveal a vandalized billboard that now read, "Birmingham's choice for the 6. The 6 o'clock news is a disaster." Carol gasped. Don continued, "Your behavior has dishonored the station and damaged our ratings and reputation. I have no choice but to take you off the air and terminate your contracts." They nodded, and now said, "You are the monster, and the people of Birmingham are the angry mob. If I were you, I'd leave town as soon as possible." I was very nervous driving back to Birmingham. On Sunday evening, I left late to avoid any confrontation with Carol or the media on the way. When I arrived home, the media had already left. The next morning, the Birmingham News broke a new scandal involving a city politician accused of embezzlement, pushing Ted and Carol's story to the back pages. No one cared about my reaction anymore. I took Susan to Mrs. Alsop's house, where she welcomed Susan. Mrs. Alsop gave me a sympathetic look. "I was so sad to hear about everything, Tom. I hope you and Susan are doing well." I thanked her, but I didn't know how things would turn out. It was telling that she didn't mention Carol at the office. Everyone was friendly but seemed to avoid me, except for Lou. He hugged me tightly. "You're a genius, IUS." I told him, "You're a master of the viral campaign. It worked out better than we expected." I hoped he said the only downside is that we'll never be able to tell anyone what we did. That's good, I replied. Carol will figure out I was behind it and come after me. I don't want you caught in the crossfire. To my surprise, my lawyer called at the end of the week with news that Carol had decided not to contest the divorce. Why? I asked. She said she'd fight me. Her attorney talked her out of it. He said she wanted to countersue for invasion of privacy. But the legal questions were too complicated and she's not popular now, no sympathetic jurors. What about Susan? I asked Carol, who swore she'd try to take her. Carol is unemployed with no prospects, no judge would give her custody. She's leaving town and giving up custody in your favor. She only wants to get her belongings before she leaves and to talk to you. If she signs the papers, I can talk to her before she leaves. I agreed, we arranged. It's the end of the week. I got almost everything I wanted. Actually, that's not true. What I really wanted was my old life back, but that was impossible. At least I had my daughter, and that was what mattered most. The next night, Lou and I celebrated over dinner. Susan came too and slept in one of their beds while we talked. I brought champagne to toast my friend. Edie raised her glass to us. She said, I thought your scheme was crazy and would. I was ready to blow up in your faces, but you know what? I salute you. You were fighting for your little girl, and you, my loving husband, thought you could handle it. Thank you both for fighting and winning despite the odds. Cheers! Lou and I agreed in unison before wrapping up everything. I felt the need to check on Missy Stevenson. She was an innocent bystander caught in the mess, suffering perhaps more than anyone else. I felt guilty for involving her, even though I had to. Although it was necessary and Ted was the real culprit, unlike me, Missy hadn't seen this coming. I called her and she invited me to lunch, indicating she didn't hold a grudge. We met at a quiet restaurant after we ordered. I asked how she was doing. She said, not well. One day I'm happily married to a TV host. The next I'm divorcing a liar who humiliated me. I know, Missy. This feels like a bad soap opera. I sympathized. She asked about my situation. I told Carol the divorce results were good. She said vindicatively she got what she deserved. What about Ted? I asked. He left town without facing me. His lawyer told me to take whatever I wanted. I don't know where he is, and I don't care. Except I keep waking up reaching for him. Are you okay financially? I asked. Yes and no. He left me a house, but it's too big with a big mortgage. Ted has to pay alimony, but I don't think he'll find a new job easily. I think I'll move in with my parents, find a job, and rebuild my life. This isn't how I imagined things. She said sadly that she felt terrible for her. She was a sweet person who didn't deserve this. I asked her to stay in touch and let me know where she was. I really liked Missy and hoped she could pull through. The last thing left was Carol's visit, which I wasn't looking forward to. I was feeling less angry now that our viral video had been a success. I felt like I'd got some dignity back and I wasn't in the mood to fight with Carol or gloat. I decided to do something nice for her by having Susan there when she arrived. When Carol got out of the SUV she'd rented to move her belongings, she frowned, but when I let Susan run to her, the frown disappeared and was replaced by a smile and happy tears as Susan hugged her. Carol looked up and whispered thank you. They played together for a long time. The visit was supposed to last an hour, but I ignored that once I decided to have Susan there. After Susan showed up and told her mother everything, Carol suggested she go to her room to play. I'll be up soon, baby daddy. I need to talk first, she said. Once Susan left, Carol turned to me, annoyed. Thank you for that, she said. I didn't expect you to let me see her. I just nodded. Carol's mood shifted. You used a private conversation to destroy me, she said. I just nodded. Carol's mood shifted. You used a private conversation to destroy me, she said. I just nodded. I don't want to fight anymore, Carol. I just want to move on. You're making me look like a fool. I don't know what to do. I'm sorry, but you're the one who started this. You're the one who made me lose my job, my family, my future. I'm sorry, but you're the one who made this happen. You brought this on yourself. Carol replied, but Susan called out asking when she'd come upstairs. Carol looked at me, then went upstairs to Susan after playing in her room. While talking to her, Carol packed her things. I heard their happy chatter from downstairs. Finally, Carol came back down with her suitcases, with Susan following. Carol knelt in front of Susan and said, "Mom has to leave. I'll be living in another state and won't see you every day, but I'll visit whenever I can, and we can. You can talk and video call as much as you like," Susan said, crying out, "No, Mummy, I don't want you to go." She clung to her mother as if she were the only life raft in the ocean. Carol lifted her, hugging her tightly and trying to reassure her, "It's okay, doll. I'll see you soon and we'll have a great time." She walked over to me, holding Susan. "Now be a good girl for Daddy. I love you, Susan. Don't forget that." Carol picked up her suitcases. She walked quickly to the door, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't look back. She loaded her suitcases into the car, waved goodbye, and drove away. I hugged my daughter, tears running down my cheeks too. I was losing my wife and Susan was losing her mother. Finally, I put Susan down. I said, "Listen, I have an idea." "What, Daddy?" she asked, tears in her eyes. "Why don't we go to the park and see the ducks and maybe get some ice cream?" She answered, "Oh yes. We can feed the cones to the ducks, can't we, Dad?" "Of course we can," I replied, trying to distract her. I knew she'd miss her mom, but I hoped young children were more resilient. I hoped I could adapt too. The next week I had to adapt even more. Late one night my boss called me into his office. "Tom, you've done a great job and we appreciate your contribution to the agency. I was waiting for the other shoe to drop, but this situation with your wife is affecting our clients. They ask if you're Carol's husband, and it impacts them. Our relationship with WXY is also strained, and they're a key media outlet for us." "Are you firing me?" I asked bluntly. "Absolutely not," he said. "We think it's best if you seek employment elsewhere." "How much time do I have?" I snapped. "Take as much as you need. I'll give you a glowing letter of recommendation." It wasn't fair, but there was no point in burning bridges. I shook his hand, assured him I understood, and thanked him. I went to Lou's office for the recommendation. "What's up, buddy?" he asked. "I just got fired," I told him. "Nonsense," he said. "I'm going to tell them what I think." I guided him back to his chair. "You're not doing anything," I said. I knew it was risky when I started. "You've done too much for me already." He wasn't happy, but he calmed down. We ended the conversation with me promising to come over for dinner on Saturday, bringing my 4-year-old. I went back to my office and updated my resume. I realized that Carol and Ted's affair had made me damaged goods in the area. Everyone liked me, but no one wanted to hire me. It was time to widen my search. Eventually, I returned to my old agency in Mobile, where the scandal hadn't followed me. They were happy to accept my experience of living in a big city. I had to sell my house in Birmingham, and although the market was decent, I got little from the sale, which had to be shared with Carol. Carol didn't disappear from our lives. She started calling Susan weekly and quickly moved to Skype so they could see each other face-to-face. To be continued. Face-to-face meetings were out of the question since Carol now lived in Santa Ana, California. Our video chat had a broader impact than expected, making her job search even outside the Southeast difficult. Eventually, she got a job teaching journalism at Santa Ana College. When I reconnected with my old agency, I needed to find a place to live. The agency connected me with a real estate agent, Marilyn Elliott, who turned out to be Missy Stevenson. She showed me several properties and we found one we liked. I told Missy about everything that had happened. She'd moved to Mobile shortly after Ted left and started a career in residential real estate. I mentioned that I needed a preschool for Susan, and Missy got excited, offering to help with that and other children's activities. I enjoyed our conversation and invited her to dinner to discuss the houses. She was pretty and like the girl next door, and I found her natural and easy to talk to. She was different from the TV personalities I was used to. She recommended a modestly priced house, which surprised me when I asked why. The house was quite a bit cheaper than I'd expected, and when I asked why, she said it was where she would like to live. I found her honesty really endearing. Missy and I got married and moved into the house she liked. I was a bit worried about how Susan and Missy would get along, but my fears were unfounded. Missy had wanted a family ever since marrying Ted, but she believed a child would hinder his career. She and Susan bonded instantly. Susan even started calling her Missy Mom, which soon became just Mom that summer. We flew to Los Angeles so Susan could visit Carol. Missy and I planned to sightsee in LA while Susan stayed with her mom for a week. I was unsure about bringing this up with Missy, given her reasons to dislike Carol. However, she thought it was a great idea. She seemed more confident in our marriage and mature about the situation than I had anticipated. We arrived at John Wayne Airport, where Carol was waiting for us despite seeing her often on Skype. I almost didn't recognize her in person. Susan was wearing her hair short and was dressed casually, so she suddenly seemed shy. She clung to Missy's waist and hid her face. Missy encouraged her to go over and say hello to Carol. Susan walked over slowly and then ran and hugged Carol. Carol was so happy that she cried. This confused and worried Susan. Carol reassured her and they hugged. Carol looked at Missy and me and thanked us. Then we went to collect our bags. When Susan stopped to look at some clothes in a shop window, Carol turned to us. She said, "I know we don't have much time, but I want to apologize. I've done a lot of thinking and therapy over the past couple of years. I realized what I had become in my pursuit of stardom and how much I hurt those around me, especially you two. You probably can't forgive me, but I hope you won't hate me." Missy and I looked at each other, then hugged Carol. We'd let go of a lot of past hurt after our vacation. I called Birmingham one evening and Edie answered. We chatted for a bit before I asked to speak to Lou. When he got on the line, I made my pitch. "You gave me a chance once, will you do it again?" I asked, feeling a surge of hope. "What are you talking about?" Tom replied, sounding puzzled. "Quit your job, move here, and start an advertising agency called Bailey and Faraday." "What do you say?" I proposed, holding my breath. Lou replied, "Only if we call it Faraday and Bailey." We laughed and started planning. Lou wasn't. He was happy at his old job and keen to try something new, so my call came at the perfect time. We relocated Lou and Edie to Mobile, with Missy helping them find a lovely home nearby. We even turned down a commission to make it easier for them. Not long after opening our agency, we met with a potential client who loved our approach. He said he wanted to stand out and asked if we could do something like a viral campaign. Lou and I smiled at each other, and I said, "Yeah, we can handle it."